At Kroger Pharmacy, care is what's most convenient for you. Care is being here when you need us. We're open evenings and weekends. Care is helping you save more. Most insurance plans and discount cards are accepted at your local Kroger Pharmacy. Care is saving you time by managing your prescriptions online. You can request refills, check order status, and more. Care is convenience that works for everyone. Kroger Health, a world of care is in store. Services and availability vary by location. Age and other restrictions may apply. For coverage, consult your health insurance company. Visit the pharmacy or our site for details.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 81. I'm your host, Sarah Head, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. And today we're talking about mermaids and mummies. Specifically, the Fiji mermaid and the Peruvian mummies. What do these two creatures have in common? How is P.T. Barnum related? And what can be learned from the Peruvian mummy fraud? Get ready to think critically.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. Rated trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am here today with my co-hosts, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. How's it going, guys?
It's going great. I vaguely remember a TV show back in the 80s where there were aliens were on Earth, and they looked like human beings, but if you looked like behind one ear, there was a mark on every one of them, and they would identify each other by finding that mark. I feel I'm in a similar position now. When I walk around and I have these little spit-up stains on my shoulders from the baby, and nobody else notices those. But other people walking around with those spit-up stains, you walk by and you kind of nod your head. Yeah, okay. I know where you're coming from. It's kind of like that. The mark of the, yes, exactly.
The mark of the parent.
Oh, God. That's what was it in the old horror movies? It was the mark of the pentagram. We have the mark of the parent.
Yes. Well,
puke stains. How's it going,
I don't have those kids, but my other kids are back. I've got my all my students. I'm teaching again, and I've got lots of interns and lots of independent study, some of which we're actually working on topics related to the sorts of things we talk about. We'll talk about that another time, maybe. But hey, and I am, since this will be out afterwards, and therefore you won't know where my house is to rob it. I am going to CryptidCon in a few days to learn with the cryptozoology curious and or believers in Kentucky. And I'll be meeting friends of the show, or actually guests on the show, Sharon Hill and Blake Smith. Sharon Hill of Doubtful News and 15 Credibility Street, and Blake Smith of Monster Talk. And
that's going to be a good panel.
So, well, we're not paneling. He's talking, but I'm sure we could always answer a question or two. Otherwise, we're going to hang out. It's in Bourbon Country, and
Fantastic.
I'm going to go to Mammoth Cave. Hopefully, I will not be abducted by the Hopkinsville goblins, and because that's where they live.
Uh-huh.
And
where else would they live?
Don't be shocked if if you hear we don't have a plan, but don't be shocked if there's some sort of audio or other kind of product or two that comes out of this. We're just going.
Awesome.
We're just going because we're curious, but I have to assume we would do something with this.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, when you've got three podcasting personalities all in one room, something's bound to happen.
Kind of, sort of, especially in Bourbon Country. So
today we have an interesting concept, I think, that has spanned many the decade. The whole idea of creating fake remains, and we're especially of strange creatures. And we're going to start with a creature that many of you are probably familiar with, which is the Fiji mermaid. And Ken, you want to give us a little introduction to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason that I know a little bit about this is because the Fiji mermaid is inextricably connected and associated with P.T. Barnum, who, in spirit of full disclosure, is like a favorite son of Connecticut. He probably is the most famous Connecticutian, certainly of the 19th and 20th centuries. We have a lot of famous people in Connecticut, most of whom are mayors and past governors who are doing time in prison, and I'm not exaggerating, and so they're kind of famous. But there's
you're like a little Illinois.
Oh yeah, it's really proud, and or Louisiana, where I went to grad school. So, but here's the deal: we are a much smaller state with a smaller population. So per capita, I think we put you guys to shame. I really do. But we can talk about this. Anyway, so P.T. The deal with P.T. Barnum is that everybody assumes they know what he's about. Oh, yeah, he's the humbug. He's the fake guy. He's the big circus impresario. And he is all those things, but he's a lot more than that. Barnum, in fact, it wasn't until he was like 60 years old, and he lived to be about 80, that he got involved in circuses. Circuses was something he came to late in life, when he actually bought into an existing circus and then went around the country as the P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum, Menagerie, Caravan, and Hippodrome. Which is
I believe there's a big movie, and I think it's a musical coming out about him this year.
Well, there was a Broadway musical called Barnum.
Well, the 2017 one is called The Great Showman. And
oh my God! Did you know who's in it? It's
starring Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman.
That's
right.
He's playing Barnum.
I know the Kathy Marr is a friend of mine, a colleague, and just a fantastic person. She's the director of the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is in a building that Barnum designed and funded, although he didn't live long enough to see it finished. And I guess Hugh Jackman, his people have been talking to her about, what she feels should be added in the movie to make it more authentic, which is really pretty cool. But like I said, Barnum, he was 60 by the time he got involved in circuses. Before that, he was a lot of things. He was a real estate tycoon, and he was a philanthropist, and he was a representative to the State House of Representatives in Connecticut. He was the mayor of Bridgeport. He was an inventor. He was a whole bunch of stuff, and he was a showman. And his big thing was his American Museum, which it was Scudder's American Museum in Manhattan. He bought it out from this guy Scudder, and it wasn't very successful. It became Barnum's American Museum, and it was museum and menagerie and theater and lecture hall, and it was a whole bunch of stuff. It was the perfect kind of Victorian phenomenon right there in the heart of Manhattan. If you have seen the movie Gangs of New York, at one point there's riots and all kinds of crazy shit, and in the background you see elephants and giraffes running down the street. That is supposed to represent the museum burned to the ground in 1865, and in fact, wild animals, the menagerie, escaped from the museum and were, walking down Fifth Avenue and down Broadway, trying to escape the conflagration. Another thing about Barnum, Barnum never said there's a sucker born every minute.
Right.
And that's kind of the typical thing. That actually was a phrase that you can trace back in gambling circles to just about before Barnum was born. And if there's an association with that phrase with Barnum, it is believed that David Hannum, who was one of the buyers of the Cardiff Giant, we've talked about Cardiff Giant on this podcast previously. So Hannum is part of the consortium of businessmen who buys the Giant. And I think I told the story that when P.T. Barnum tried to buy the Giant, and that would have been, for the timing was right, that would have gone to the museum. It wasn't for a circus. It would have gone to the museum in New York. They turned him down. So this consortium of local businessmen bought a 3/4 interest in it. Barnum's reaction, his response was, well, hell with that. I'll build my own Cardiff Giant, and I'll say it's the real thing. And the irony, this hilarious story, is that when Barnum's circus was in Manhattan, the Cardiff Giant was on the road in Manhattan, and Barnum's Giant outdrew his fake of the fake, outdrew the real fake. Mark Twain writes this short story, a ghost story, that's all based on that. It's hilarious. And it's apparently when David Hannum was confronted by reporters who thought this was hilarious, he said, well, how do you explain the fact that Barnum's fake is actually outdrawn the real fake? Hannum says, well, there's a sucker born every minute. So he's the one making fun of the people who are suckered in by Barnum. All of Barnum's biographers, there are several of them, all really get exercised about this. They say that was not only is there no evidence that P.T. Barnum ever said it would have been completely out of character. He viewed the folks who came to his circus, who came to his sideshows, who came to his museum as customers he was to entertain. Now, entertainment could mean humbug, it could mean fake, but he never thought that they were dumb or suckers. He never expressed that.
He didn't see himself as predatory.
No. I mean, one could argue in some cases he might have been, but he did not see that. He was an abolitionist. Her name is Lucy Stone, was a very important person in women's suffrage in the 19th century. And Barnum says he heard her speaking, I think in New York or Pennsylvania, was transfixed by this, and he produced her. He brought her to Connecticut to talk to people about women's suffrage. He was a very strong supporter of that. And for his time, he was relatively non-abusive. I mean, one could argue that the use of animals in circus is, by definition, ritualized animal abuse, right?
And it is largely ended in the United States.
Right. Ringling Brothers just closed down, right?
Yeah.
And Barnum was, compared to others of his time, was a lot better at treating his animals.
Right.
So most of what I can say about the Fiji Mermaid comes from Barnum's biography, which of course is titled "The Life of P.T. Barnum, Written by Himself." And that's the typical Barnum thing to do, right?
And before you get in, the Fiji Mermaid, I believe, will be the third, not the third time we've mentioned him, but the third case we have examined that either he was responsible for, or, as in the case of the Cardiff Giant, he became very involved with. He didn't create the Cardiff Giant; he's exploited it. So the Cardiff Giant, the Ishimaya hoax, we recently talked about.
The Aztec children, yes, absolutely.
Yes, and now the Fiji Mermaid. Maybe there's another we have forgotten, but I believe this is our third one.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's the third one that we connected directly back to him. I know we've mentioned him several times on the show, but how do you not?
Yes, exactly. But now, Jeb, Barnum would rise to the occasion and say, well, sir, I really am not responsible for the Fiji Mermaid. I only rented it for a while. And that's actually the case.
Right.
In Barnum's autobiography, he actually says, you know what, I'm kind of in a confessional mood here, so I'm going to tell you everything that actually happened. Well, it begins with Moses Kimball. And Moses Kimball is kind of Boston's version of Barnum. He's got a politician and a showman. And like Barnum, he bought an already existing museum, the New England Museum. Now, when we say museum, don't think of what we have today as museums. These are different. It's more like Ripley's Believe It or Not, with museum stuff, but also with entertainment, with theater. So it's a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of stuff. And Moses Kimball had the New England Museum, and he opened up a Boston Museum. He opened up a museum in Lowell, Massachusetts. He was a museum tycoon, and his displays, his exhibits were similar to Barnum's in that it was just a mess of stuff, some of which was legit and some of which wasn't. Barnum says that Moses Kimball came to him in Barnum buys Scudder's Museum in 1841, and he's going to completely renovate it. 1842, Kimball shows up in New York with this box, and he tells Barnum, listen, I've had this for a while. I'm not making any money off of it. I respect your ability to sell anything to everybody. What can we do with this? And it is Barnum says, he opens it up, and it's this kind of disgusting, dark figure that's half fish and half what appears to be monkey. Kimball gives him a backstory. The backstory is, in 1817, a British sailor found this in a market in Calcutta. It's always Calcutta, right? Found it in a market in Calcutta. He knew that this was going to be worth a lot of money, and that he could set his family up for life if he only could buy this. The seller wanted $6,000. If you're an economist out there, $6,000 in 1817, I'm sure, converted to modern money, that's an extraordinary amount of money.
It's a huge amount of money.
Yeah. But according to this is the story, understand, Barnum is telling us this, that Moses Kimball told him this, that a sailor told him this. So the validity of any of this is certainly up for grabs.
I don't know what you're talking about. That sounds like a totally legit chain of command.
Pretty legit, right? Well, here's the deal. The sailor says, I went back to the boat. I actually took money from the storehouse of the boat, took money from my boss, the guy, he's supposed to be the captain. I went and bought this for $6,000. I left the first mate in charge. I went back to England so I could hide this thing away, and then told my boss, listen, I borrowed $6,000. I will work it off. Goes back to work, tells his family, this is going to be our fortune. Protect it. Apparently, he dies. The family looks at this disgusting thing and says, oh, we don't want it. They try to sell it. Moses Kimball comes just finds out about it and buys it for, pennies on the dollar. But he can't make any money off of it, so he brings it to Barnum. Barnum's first reaction is, he tells Moses Kimball, I don't know if this is legit or not. I have to show it to my naturalist. That's what he says in his book.
Nice.
And then Barnum says, I showed it to my naturalist, and here's what my naturalist says. My naturalist says, I don't see any way anybody could have faked this. The fish, I've never seen a fish like that. The monkey, I've never seen a monkey like that. So I can't explain that it's a fake. But it's a fake. And Barnum says, well, you just said you have no evidence it's a fake. Why do you say it's a fake? And Barnum says, his naturalist says, because, sir, I do not believe in mermaids. Barnum took that and said, well, I'm going to run with, my naturalist says he can't figure out how it was done. Yeah. And I'm going to run with that. And the fact that my naturalist brought up this, it wasn't called the Fiji Mermaid. It was just this chimera, this weird amalgam of two completely different kinds of animals. Interestingly, Moses Kimball, when he gets this back, in his advertising, he compares the Fiji Mermaid to the duck-billed platypus. In other words, an animal, which is a real animal, but it seems, wow, is it a duck? Is it a mammal? What the hell is that? So he understands, wow, obviously these are two very different critters, but there's a duck-billed platypus. Why not a Fiji mermaid? Why not a part monkey, part fish? In any event, so Barnum decides to go with that. He said, I'm going to call this a mermaid. Where should we put it? Well, let's put it in Fiji. Again, middle of the Pacific. It's exotic. It's an exotic locale. Very few people have been there. So we'll say it's the Fiji mermaid. Kimball tells Barnum that the sailor who bought it that the family told him that it was Japanese fishermen who brought it up in their nets. How it got to Japan, to Calcutta, is unclear. So Barnum, if you read now Barnum's description of what he does to sell this,
and as we might talk about, that's not terribly far off from the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and even
we'll get to
Barnum, and I'll let you hit that. Even Barnum later on in the autobiography, he has this extensive quote where he says, "Well, it does. This is the kind of thing that people in Japan actually were doing at the time." We can talk more about that in a little bit. So anyway, what Barnum does next, it's really quite beautiful in a sense. It's 1842, and his ability to manipulate the media, and in this case we're talking about the press, and to manipulate public opinion is absolutely stunning. The first thing he does is he gets his buddy, Levi Lyman. Levi Lyman gets the job of pretending to be Dr. J. Griffin. Dr. J. Griffin is a made-up person, not a real person. And, but here's the deal. We have seen this before.
I was going to say, it's not the first time he's done it.
But it's not just him. It's even in more recent archaeological fakes. They just make up the names. So Levi Lyman becomes Dr. Griffin. Barnum knows a guy with an upper-class English accent goes unquestioned in America. So he's a British man of science, and he's a representative of the Lyceum of Natural History in London. I don't even know if that's a real place.
It might be now.
I don't think it's a real place.
I recognize those words. I couldn't put it together. I will just say there are, of course, no people involved in alternative archaeology today who get more credibility because they have unusual or interesting foreign accents, British accents, or anything else. There's no one whose claims of ancient global civilizations and rely on an accent of any sort. But anyway.
No one might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but we'll go with that. Anyway, so
that's a good plan.
So now he's Dr. Griffin. He is here with this Fiji mermaid because the folks in London want the people of America to be aware of this spectacular, amazing discovery. Now, Barnum says in the autobiography, I was a little bit leery about using Levi because he had used him before. Folks listening to this are probably aware of the fact that Barnum made a big deal about his discovery of a 161-year-old ex-slave Joyce Heth, who was the nursemaid of George Washington. Levi Lyman, in another role, was the manager of Joyce Heth. He is not playing Dr. Griffin, playing somebody else. He is supposed to be the one who discovered her, this ancient African-American woman who used to be a slave and is able to prove that she was George Washington's nursemaid, and she was put in the sideshow. She was exhibited first, of course, in the museum. As a live exhibit.
It's like American Horror Show. They play different roles every year. Nobody cares.
It's just the same people.
I guess. But Barnum was concerned somebody would see that. But apparently he dressed differently. There was makeup involved. There was the accent. Nobody put the two things together.
Well, he's Clark Kent with glasses. He's Superman without. It's all good.
Well, there's also, we're talking about a time when, did they even have radio? No. There was no way for hundreds of eyes to be on him at any one point. Right. So it was probably pretty easy.
There's not even a lot of photography. There is photography, but it's not common. It's not easy.
This is before the Civil War.
So
anyway, so he's presented to the media as this representative from London. Then Barnum does what Barnum does is to drum up interest. He doesn't. Bottom line, he says he knows this thing is a fake, but for him, it doesn't make any difference. This is about selling tickets to his museum. So the next thing that the newspapers in New York begin getting letters from southern states. And we know of at least three, that talk about, my goodness, we have been in the company of Dr. J. Griffin, and these are all people of high economic, political, social standing. We have been in the presence of J. Griffin, who has shown us this amazing thing, this amazing mermaid, and people in New York are so lucky that it's coming to the Barnum Museum. And one comes from Alabama, one comes from South Carolina, one comes from Washington, D.C., and they all are differently worded. They're from different places. But the fiction here is that this thing is going on this private tour through the southern states, again, to get merely because the people in London want to share this with the folks of the United States. Barnum, in his autobiography, said, well, I wrote all of those letters, and I sent them to friends of mine in those states, and I gave them the high sign when they should send them to different newspapers in New York. And he did that because he didn't, if they all came from New York, maybe there would have been a question. If they all were written in the same tone, there would have been questions. If they all came from the same city, there would have been questions. So he felt in this way he was covering his ass. Nobody would put it together with him. But then the newspapers in New York start writing these articles, publishing these pieces on the basis of these testimonials provided by these not anonymous, but these named people in the South, who in fact are all P.T. Barnum. Then Barnum puts Griffin in a fancy hotel in Philadelphia with the Fiji Mermaid. He's at the hotel and he tells people, well, I have this spectacular thing I'm going to be bringing it in New York. They're not ready for me yet. I don't want to go there. I don't want to ruin the surprise for people. And of course, he actually tells people in Philadelphia, well, I'm really not supposed to show this to anyone, but would you like to come up to my hotel room and see the Fiji Mermaid? And among the people he invites up are, editors of newspapers, who then go back and write these laudatory articles about this is the best, this is the most important thing ever found. It clearly is some strange animal, part fish, part human. It is a mermaid. It's the story of mermaids, all in one object, in one artifact, proves that story. Those articles are printed. The odds are these editors knew that this was bullshit, but it sold newspapers to say, hey, we've seen this mermaid. This is spectacular. Because their articles are then picked up by the newspapers in New York. So there is a building frenzy. Barnum's not done. When the mermaid arrives in New York, Barnum announces that there is going to be a 1-week limited engagement where you can have a personal experience with the Fiji Mermaid, limited number of tickets. After that week, it will go on display for a month in the American Museum, but there's going to be big crowds and you won't have the kind of personal experience you might want to have. When I'm reading this and I'm thinking Steve Jobs at Apple,
Mm-hmm.
how they build up this, people become literally frenzied about the possibility of some new, completely game-changing piece of technology.
And being the first adopter.
And the thing, too, is, and I don't know if this is true, but you read fairly frequently of how maybe Apple intentionally doesn't make, they make fewer than they know the demand is going to be, because that makes the demand even stronger. They keep the supply under what the demand is going to be, because then people are going to go nuts demanding that they make more of them. I
can think of other products, I'm not going to name, that I know do that.
Oh yeah, it's a marketing tactic. I mean, that's been around forever.
Barnum was brilliant at that.
Barnum was an early adapter.
What happens is, people wanted to be the first to see it. They wanted to be able to say, "Oh, you're seeing it at the museum. Well, I saw it already in a much smaller crowd." Barnum starts handing out these posters, these bills. He hands out 10,000 of them. He has newspaper boys selling them for a penny. Barnum says they cost him 2 cents each, so he's taking a loss on it. They are detailed stories about, he repeats Kimball's story, and there are engravings of mermaids in this. The engravings in the mermaids look nothing at all like the Fiji mermaid. The Fiji mermaid is this wizened, dark, and kind of horrible-looking thing, because, in fact, it's part fish and part monkey. In the engravings he includes are bare-breasted women with long flowing hair and the lower bodies of fish. And they are on rocks, and they're, waving to sailors. And
using
gets away with this.
It's the old tactic of using sex to sell.
It's I do not doubt that there's some of that. And probably the kinds of images that he was including, you couldn't include in anything other than, well, this is science. These are not naked women. These are mermaids in their natural habitat. Barnum admits that every once in a while somebody said, that thing doesn't look anything like these posters you've developed. He had an 18-foot banner that he wanted to set across the street, a gigantic painting, again, of a bare-breasted, naked mermaid, and that other people in the museum who were in on the thing said, no, that's just not going to fly. You can't do that. People are just going to get righteously pissed off. And so Barnum actually said, to keep them on my side, I didn't post that. I didn't put the poster up, the large banner.
Can we go to break real quick, and when we come back, can we hear the rest of the story?
A little bit more.
Absolutely. All right, cool. So we're going to go to break real quick, and when we come back, we're going to finish our introductory story to our fascinating Fiji mermaid.
Hey podcast fans, check out the ARC365 podcast at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365. That's ARCH365 for your daily dose of archaeology. Each episode is less than 15 minutes long, and we have some great guests recording about awesome archaeology. We also try to throw in some definitions and basic archaeological information. So, check out the 365 Days of Archaeology podcast only in 2017 at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365 today. Find us also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Music by typing ARC365 into the search. Now back to the show.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos.
One comes with pico de gallo
And creamy chipotle ranch.
and the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
At Kroger Pharmacy, care is what's most convenient for you. Care is being here when you need us. We're open evenings and weekends. Care is helping you save more. Most insurance plans and discount cards are accepted at your local Kroger Pharmacy. Care is saving you time by managing your prescriptions online. You can request refills, check order status, and more. Care is convenience that works for everyone. Kroger Health, a world of care is in store. Services and availability vary by location. Age and other restrictions may apply. For coverage, consult your health insurance company. Visit the pharmacy or our site for details.
And we are back, and we are still talking about the Fiji mermaid. And Ken, I know I interrupted you, but can you tell us the rest of the story?
Yeah, I mean, the rest of the story is really pretty brief. So it's exhibited for 4 weeks. Barnum pays Kimball $12.50 to lease this thing per week.
That's not too bad.
Yeah,
I was going to say, money
And
just sounds so weird from the past. $12.50,
right?
and you're like, that's probably the equivalent of like a couple $100 nowadays.
But
When is this?
this is 1842.
All right, I'll see what I can do while you go on.
Right. So, but no, actually, if you get a website where you can convert what money is, I've got more numbers for you, because Barnum is really good at keeping track of every penny that comes in and comes out, and he keeps a record of it. He's a virtual accountant. And here's what Barnum actually provides in the autobiography for how well he did.
$12.50 a week is $315.
All right, that's now. How about this? How about $1,200?
You made $1,200 back then?
Hold on.
It's going to be about $30,000.
All right.
About $30,000.
All right. There's one more number for you. Barnum says that in the 4 weeks leading up to the appearance of the mummy at the museum, so this is a total, so a month's worth of receipts.
All right.
He brought in $1,200. So you're saying a month.
$30,000 a month. Yes.
Right. The 4 weeks during which he exhibited the mermaid, $3,300.
All right, so that's going to be about triple. So yeah, about $83,000.
That is some serious
in 2016 dollars.
coin.
2016 dollars.
That's serious coin. So, and then Barnum says, listen, obviously this worked. Obviously this brought people into the museum. And I've got a quote for Barnum in just a little bit, where Barnum justifies this. Barnum says, hey, look, folks, my goal wasn't to fool people. My goal wasn't to humbug people. My goal was to entertain. And if it took, look at what this mermaid did. When you came to the museum, he made a big issue about this. There was no extra fee to see the mermaid. You paid your entrance fee in the front, and the mermaid was one of the exhibits that was open to you. So that if this many more people, 2.5 times, 3 times more people showed up, that's 3 times more people also seeing a beluga whale that he had in a tank there, a live elephant, a live giraffe, artifacts from Africa, artifacts from Mexico. So his justification is, this is what it takes to get people in. This works. And you know what? As long as they're here, they actually are going to be educated.
And that sounds a lot like what people on, say, Animal Planet and Discovery would say about their mermaid show.
I think so.
I also
So
just put my salary.
I
just put my salary into the inflation calculator. It's really disappointing in 1842. Anyway,
don't tell us. And
yes.
After the 4 weeks, the mummy goes back. It goes on tour. Ends up back in Boston at the Moses Kimball's exhibit. And I'll send this to you, Sarah. Maybe we can post this. But this is interesting, and it actually leads us into the Nazca story. So in this long broadside that Moses Kimball puts up, now he's going to take advantage of the fact that this thing has been incredibly successful down in New York. And so he's got part of the broadside in big bold letters, Egyptian mummies. And these are all the things you're going to see in his museum for, by the way, 25 cents. What is 25 cents in your inflation calculator?
I'll see what I can do.
All right. So Egyptian mummies and ancient sarcophagi, 3,000 years old, and an entire family of Peruvian mummies. The duck-billed
A whole
platypus,
family?
the connecting link. Yes, a Peruvian mummy, a family of Peruvian mummies. The connecting link, the platypus, the connecting link between the bird and beast, being evidently half each, and the curious half-fish, half-human Fiji mermaid, which was exhibited in most of the principal cities of America in the years 1840, 41, and 42, to the wonder and astonishment of thousands of naturalists and other scientific persons whose previous doubts of the existence of such an astonishing creation were entirely removed. None of that is true. I mean, I understand, well, yeah, it was in New York, but thousands of naturalists saw this and said, oh, yeah, it's definitely true. No, these guys all said, no, this is crap. In fact, there was a bunch of medical students who, for a lark, when this was before it was in the museum, it was being exhibited in the somewhere in Times Square, I think it was, this private, this this personal, up close and personal experience you have with the mummy, actually there was a glass globe over it, so Victorian. They actually, when nobody was looking, took the top off of it and put a cigar in the mummy's mouth, put it back on, and then when Dr. Griffin returned to lecture, one of them asked, when they found the mummy, was he smoking a cigar? And Griffin looked and he was like mortified and very angry. But so people were, and Barnum was right in a way, people were entertained by this. In a letter that Barnum wrote after this whole thing, he says very clearly he presents his rationale, which is exactly as Jeb has pointed out, for the rationale for shows on the Animal Planet, History Channel, whatever. This is Barnum. As a general thing, I have not duped the world, nor attempted to do so. I have generally given people the worth of their money twice told. The mermaid, woolly horse, plowing elephant were merely used by me in advertising to attract attention. Yeah. So he's saying, hey, listen,
he's so
folks,
humble.
This is, well, he was mayor of Bridgeport, for God's sake. That puts you on a pretty high pedestal. Hey, wait a minute. He's one of the mayors of Bridgeport who never did time in prison. And that puts him in a very, very
a select club.
A very select club, yeah.
Those college students, those medical students that were paying to do that, they were paying about $6 a pop.
So that's,
that's not chump change. That's lunch. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And with everything else, cost of living is so different. $6 back then. $6 a lot of monmoney. $6 today. Yeah, 25 cents. Right. Yeah.
That's a lot of money. And so I think that in the end, Barnum's bottom line was real, not real. What's the difference? Of course, it's a fake, but it entertains. It brings people. It gets people through the doors, and look at all of the education they're going to get in my museum. As a person, as a person who lives in Connecticut, who's good friends with the director of the Barnum Museum, we'll just leave it at that. By the way, the Barnum. The big museum in New York burned to the ground, and Barnum soon thereafter. That was like 1865, 1870, 1871 is when he gets involved with the circus, which is kind of just a traveling version of his American museum, and then he's doing political stuff. It's towards the end of his life that he gives. This is in the late 1880s. He dies in 1891. So it's late 1880s, early 90s. He gives a bequest of $100,000 to build a building in Bridgeport, which becomes his home, which will both house some of his exhibit. It's a much smaller building, so some of the exhibit. It will also house the Bridgeport Historical Society, and the upstairs rooms will be rented out to companies, and hopefully their rent will pay the freight of having this museum open to the public. That didn't work. It shut down for a while. The town of Bridgeport, the city of Bridgeport, took it over. They used the building. It's a gorgeous building, by the way, as kind of an adjunct to an annex to the town hall. And it's only in the 1960s that the people say, you know what, Barnum is one of the most famous people in Connecticut. We should be able to afford to put together a museum focused on his life, focused on the history of Bridgeport. They do so. Kathy arrives, I don't know when she arrives on the scene, in the 80s or 90s. And, we very rarely get tornadoes in Connecticut. In 2010, a tornado hit the state. It hit Bridgeport. And what did it hit? Ground zero? It hit the Barnum Museum. And it has been closed ever since. It is, and you know what happens when a building is damaged and they have to come in if you want to refurbish it, you have to bring it up to not 1891 code. The building Barnum dies in 1891. The building is completed in 1893, so he doesn't live to see that. But when you're going to refurbish a building in 2010, you have to bring it up to the 21st century code, which is enormously expensive. There's a big dome, beautiful red brick building, and the dome actually turned. The tornado actually turned the dome, and so that's dangerous. And of course, a gigantic bank built this big white beast of a structure kind of all around it. They actually wanted to tear down the building, and historic preservationists objected to that. Then they wanted to paint the entire thing like white, because that's the color of their bank building, and it's this gorgeous red brick. that too, they decided wasn't the best idea. And for 7 years now, Kathy has been working grants and working any one of a number of possible financial resources to try to get it opened again. There is a museum. There is the Barnum Museum now in kind of the part of the bank building is open, but the main structure is not. It doesn't have a certificate of occupancy. So, of all the things in Bridgeport, Bridgeport is unfortunately the butt of a lot of jokes in Connecticut. It is a very poor town, a lot of crime, and the one gorgeous, really beautiful historical building in the town was the Barnum, and it was the one that got hit.
Of course.
Right. Barnum had this spectacular house that he built that was kind of Southwest Asian looking, like a lot of turrets and things, and that burned down as well. Before fire codes, before sprinkler systems, a lot of these structures that were made basically wood in the interior burned. Oh, you had a question, Jeb.
I did, and you were talking about the material, and you're talking about the archaeological, and I have been championing at the bit to ask a question I don't entirely understand. What the hell is the damn Fiji mermaid made of?
What is this thing?
Now, understand, we could answer that question today much better if we knew where the damn Fiji mermaid was.
Oh, do we no longer have it?
So what do we?
Yeah.
So what evidence do we? What evidence do we have? I mean, because apparently everything. I'm not saying he's cursed, but you're telling me everything he touches eventually is destroyed.
No, you're saying he's cursed.
Some of that, right? Well, maybe. The deal is what we have is his naturalist, and I actually asked Kathy today. It's Labor Day. Do we know the name of this naturalist? I mean, who is this guy? What is his background? And she says, "Damn it, I don't remember his name, but I'll get it to you tomorrow." So that when we post the notes for this. If Kathy can come up, Kathy Marr, the director of the museum, if she can come up with the name and get a little bit of background on him, I will be more than happy to share it.
We'll see what we can do.
He says, well, it's a fish and it's a monkey, and it is, very cleverly, ingeniously sewn together. But the fact of the matter is, we really don't have a detailed forensic analysis by a biological anthropologist or by a biologist or a primatologist or, for that matter, an ichthyologist as to what exactly the hell it was. There certainly were scales. The bottom of the mermaid is fish. The top had hair. The overall look of it is, well, it's simian. And I've heard people say, well, maybe it's a baboon. The pictures I've seen, not pictures, the engravings don't look baboon to me. And either it may have burned up in a fire in Boston, it may have been destroyed, it conceivably while it was being toured around the country. There are any one of a number. It gets to be like the card of China. There are a bunch of people who say, no, we've got it, but those all are fakes of the fake. The one exception to that is, and Kathy again is skeptical, but maybe, is that the Harvard Peabody has a Fiji mermaid in their collection, and some people, although it doesn't look exactly like the one that Barnum is displaying, remember those are engravings, those are woodcuts, so maybe in fact the one at Harvard is the real deal.
And I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at a picture of it right now. One of the best pictures. There's two pictures of it. One is on the site, which has a lot of information on this, the hoaxes.org, the Museum of Hoaxes. They have a very long and useful entry, which Wikipedia basically just pulls a lot from on this. And they have a picture of it. There's one other picture from the Boston Globe. That's actually a much better picture. It clearly has things. There are things in it.
Okay.
But good luck. So my understanding, there are two shows that have actually been on, two episodes of the show Monster Talk Again. We've done a crossover with them. One they did on Carnival Gaffs, and they used that to talk about the Minnesota Iceman. The other one was actually on Mermaids, and they talked about the Discovery show or Animal Planet show. It's the same. But they talked a lot about this, actually. And my understanding is that there is some research, although not everybody agrees entirely, that this comes from a Japanese artistic tradition.
Yes. Yeah. And as I said, Barnum actually mentions that in his autobiography that, somebody tracked this down, and it sounds like there are Japanese artists who doing this for not to sell to people, not to make a ton of money, but that once they realized these crazy Europeans will pay a lot of money for this, they began cranking out these chimeras.
What's this art style that could possibly be attributed to it, and what's the purpose of it?
I would have to go back and look more closely, but my understanding is that some of these chimeras were actually used as and it's not because we don't know, like they actually would have been in Shinto rituals where there are, like in cultures all over the world, there are monstrous beings, there are beings that are considered sacred that have elements that include humans, include animals, include parts of one animal, parts of another, and that this was in essence, while animal parts were used, it's not, my understanding is it's not as simple as I take a fish, I take a monkey, I have a monkey fish. It would be that you use bits here and there, but then you also carve other parts out of other materials, whether paper mache or wood or something else, to create your final creature. And if you look at the Peabody one, the ribs look, I mean, I haven't studied it, but they look, and there's several other ones like this, more constructed. They do not look like the ribs that fit the monkey, but that the skull does appear to be a mammalian skull, whether a monkey or not. It kind of looks like a monkey, but I don't know it. So it's a creative form. It's basically creative taxidermy. And you see artists who make often very Victorian themed, but creative taxidermy today.
Oh, yeah. All kinds of
into this. So the argument here is, and several people have talked about this. Again, they had as the guest Paolo Viscardi, and he talked about this on Monster Talk. A lot of these were being made initially as representations of non-human entities in Japanese, in pre-1850 Japanese worldview. But then European sailors ran into them and they're like, that's a mermaid.
Right.
And it's like, I'll sell you one. Sure.
Right. Sure. Whatever, man. Just hand me those dollars.
And there's also an older tradition of that. I think it's older in European tradition, the Jenny Hanover, which was the same sort of thing where things like skates and rays would be somewhat modified.
Oh, yeah.
To look more human, to have a more human face. And you still sometimes see people freak out about this.
My dad had one of those. It was like a freeze-dried manta ray, but they had adjusted the face because the faces are underneath. And it was cool, but creepy. And I believe my mom got rid of it in like one of the first garage sales we had when we moved back to Indiana. But
so I would argue that this is kind of a syncretism, that you've got a tradition of this with sailors. And remember, while we think of mermaids as fictional, mermaids, their history goes back. It appears their history goes back to depictions. I mean, first of all, there are stories of fairy-like creatures in the sea, selkies, mermaids, etc. They're very similar to fairy stories on land in many ways. But the high time of mermaid stories, one, they're primarily associated with the area around Scotland, and second, again, like fairies, and secondly, their big sort of high time is the early modern period. It's not the medieval period, though there are plenty of images of sirens, so it's not like it starts then. But you get tons of what we would consider sort of cryptozoological reports of mermaids from about 1500 to about 1820. And then you do hear of some after that, but they, to some degree, start really disappearing. But there is a real interest. And part of it is there's a European idea that creatures on land have counterparts in the water. So that you will have all kinds of things, including people. And then as we start to get more interested in human diversity, but it's still pre-scientific, there gets to be more interest in mermaids, and they're seen less as supernatural, but very real, as quite real. And that starts to fall apart, and they become sort of pop culture icons, sort of like the vampire does in the 19th century. And so this is in the highlight of that, where the idea of a mermaid was not entirely biologically ridiculous to customers coming from Europe or America. And at the same time, you have people that are seeing these sort of prototypes as also part of worldview. So I think it's kind of a syncretism. And then, of course, but at the same time, there is also I can just sell this and make money. I don't need to buy. I don't need to believe in it.
Right.
So that's my stay in the background. I will admit this is not something I have full expertise on, but that is my general understanding. I've seen a few. I have seen, and I am not going to post pictures because I think it is entirely against the ethos of these places, but I have seen one in the Museum of the Weird in Austin, Texas. But that one, I will say, looked less impressive. That's also where I saw the Minnesota Iceman. I saw some that were, to me, more impressive, and you might be like, what does that mean? I'm like, you have to see them for yourself. You have to pay your 2 bits or $6. I forgot how it is. And saw them in the UCM Museum, the UCM Museum,
Okay,
better said as UCM Museum, also known as the Abita Mystery House in Abita Springs, Louisiana. I went there to see a footprint of the Honey Island swamp monster, a sort of famous
Of course you did.
Of course I did. Which is usually considered a hoax even by a lot of cryptozoologists, although not all.
Why are all the cool museums down south, man?
I can't tell you. Well, I mean, we're talking about that the best Fiji mermaid apparently is the one at Harvard. So not all of them.
That's true.
But I did see those. They had 2 there, and they are, and I showed them to you, but everybody else will have to go see them. Well, you can find them online, but they are actually quite impressive, and I suspect they are built in a way somewhat similar to the original. A little bit of sculpture, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think also there's how there's this tradition among scientists saying, well, maybe this is just a misinterpretation of something. So the Star of Bethlehem, maybe that was a supernova.
Right.
Isn't there now a tradition of, well, maybe what sailors were seeing was actually fill in the blank dolphins?
Yeah.
Some other
sea cows.
Exactly.
That is an old idea, and I have seen legitimate defenses of it with the effect of not hallucination, but what do you call it? Oasis effects, like the
all right.
Yeah, like temperature in water. But you know what? That's one of these things that skeptics, they will sometimes have to find a materialist reason for every single thing.
Yeah.
And it turns out that also studying how the human mind works, both psychologically and culturally, has its values as well.
Right.
I
don't know, man. You have to be at sea for a hell of a long time to see a dolphin and go, that looks like a woman who's naked from the waist up.
I'll just tell you.
Or
I'll
that's
just tell you
this scurvy or something.
I'll just tell you this, Ken. I've not done a lot. I've not done any underwater archaeology, but as somebody who works who's done a lot of colonial archaeology, you read a lot about sort of early modern maritime archaeology and the material record. They were hurt up for a lot of things. I'm just saying. And
all right, we'll leave it at that, Jim.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, so we've talked about the Fiji mummy, and I mean, it's impossible to tell what it's made out of completely, but we have a concept of how the mummy was put together and all that. And that kind of feeds into what the other object we wanted to talk about today, which is the Nazca mummy. And we're going to hit on...
There's a lot of them.
Right. The fake mummies, though.
Yes.
Right.
Well, we'll talk about that.
Well, we can talk about the real mummies, too. But... We're going to go to break real quick, and when we come back, we're going to start digging into what the Nazca mummies are and how they kind of relate to the Fiji mummy, or mermaid.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Interested in archaeology? Want to hear from experts in the field about the latest discoveries and interpretations? Check out the Archaeology Show every other Saturday and let hosts Chris Webster and April Camp Whitaker take you deeper into the story. Check out the Archaeology Show at www.archpodnet.com/archaeology and subscribe, rate, and comment on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and the Google Music Store. That's www.archpodnet.com/archaeology. Now back to the show.
And we are back, and we're going to move from talking about the Fiji mermaid. that wasn't going to happen. To the Nazca mummies. And Jeb, you were saying there's more than one.
Well, so if you are familiar with this, first of all, I give I think I talked actually on 15 Credibility Street with Sharon Hill for probably about 50 minutes. So we went into more detail, I think. I also retold the story, which we've told here, and we may tell again a little, of the Roswell slides, which we covered on our Roswell episode, Excavating Roswell. But last fall, you may recall that like Coast to Coast and other sort of fringy places, and even some not so fringy places, they showed off a giant alien claw. You may remember this.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked for all the world like it was a bunch of sticks, although it turns out it's probably not a bunch of sticks. It appears to be a bunch of phalanges, a bunch of finger bones.
Right.
Which are kind of like sticks, only bones.
Right. This seems to be from the same source. So this gets very complicated. But basically, earlier this year, you started to see, and it made a touch of like not mainstream news like Washington Post or whatever, but like the Daily Mail. And the Sun and other tabloids, and even there, it was never qualified as more than could it be? I mean, they never even got past that. And one of the reasons that may be why is some of the people involved have been involved in things that fell apart as hoaxes. Most famously, and I did talk about this on Sharon's show, Jaime Maussan, the Mexican reporter turned UFO personality, TV person. He was sort of one of the major people involved. We talked about this on the Roswell show with the Roswell slides, where pictures of what turned out to be the remains of an indigenous American child that had been dug up in 1898 in Mesa Verde were being passed off as, or mistaken, according to some people, as a alien from the Roswell crash, even though it looked very obviously like it was in a museum, and everyone who saw it even months earlier when it was still a little blurry was like, that looks like a mummy in a museum, which is, of course, exactly what it turned out to be.
And didn't there actually turn out to be a little sign someplace
Yes.
on the edge of one of the pictures saying that's what it was?
And and even though there had been allegedly efforts, including with all these top people, to deblur it for years, a group of both skeptics and ufologists not involved with this deblurred it within 48 hours. Mm-hmm. And we talked about that some on that. But so a number of the same people got involved in this, but it's a very complicated, and I don't want to get into all of it, partly because some of the resources available to me are no longer available. I was actually following a thread on a particular internet forum that has since disappeared after it got declared a hoax by the forum administrators, even though they have a hoaxes forum, which you can probably figure out which one I'm talking about. But also there's a good article that sort of summarizes a lot of this. And so I would much rather talk about some specific, or not specific, but some angles that we're interested in. So go ahead and read the article in The Atlantic, Atlantic.com. Obviously, this will be in the show notes. The Racism Behind Alien Mummy Hoaxes. And this is by Christopher Haney, Heaney, published on August 1st of this year, with the subtitle, Pre-Columbian Bodies Are Once Again Being Used as Evidence for Extraterrestrial Life. And this article does a lot of what I think I would cover. And so rather than just retell you the story, you can go look at it. We can give you our thoughts. There are some details that aren't there. But basically, in last fall, that claw showed up. And then what appears to be from the same source, and there are a couple of people named in the article that appear to be involved in this. One is an alleged tomb robber named Mario. That is a pseudonym, which sounds a lot like our Fiji Mummy we were just talking about. And then there's another individual who is named in the article, and you can go look this up, but if you follow his Twitter name and other things of him, it becomes clear that he is also involved in a UFO religious group called Alpha E Omega, which is a big sort of like partially Christian themed, partially not, or maybe it is, it's hard to tell from outside, UFO group in Peru. And so this YouTuber, this Twitterer, this person is the source for the information on this big hand. And then he starts apparently, and again, the links in here, some of which you'll have to read Spanish or have to use Google Translate to use. But the ones that are translatable are actually pretty translatable with Google. Then little mummies started to show up, like little, like a couple of feet, I think at most. And they were kind of like the Fiji mummies. They are full body mummies, but they're like 2 feet tall.
So they're like little teeny tiny bubbies.
Yeah, and like what a skeptic would say about the Fiji mermaid, they appear to be constructed out of parts. They are a chimera. They are supposed to sort of look like humanoid little gray alien types with elongated heads, but they frankly look like they're made of sticks. Like they kind of do, but there do appear to be bones. If you look at x-rays, because they're having some x-rays again, you can follow some of these various things. But what caught all the attention was the mummy named Maria, which I'm going to spoil it right now. Genetics turned out was A, 100% human, and B, male. But I digress. A lot of skeptics, and this kind of annoyed the hell out of me. A lot of skeptics were like, "Well, is it constructed? Is it like?" If anybody who knows any anthropology takes a look at it, media is like, "No, that's clearly." Especially if you know any archaeology of South America, that is clearly from a mummy bundle. Like that is clearly a human skeleton, and it's the kind you find in the Nazca area and the Paracas culture in southern Peru. You find them elsewhere, but that's where they're most famous. I mean, Ule, used to dig these things up. I think Ule did that. Yes, in the Paracas culture in the 100 years ago and plus. And I knew exactly what it was as soon as I saw it, with the exception that one, it's covered in this weird white grayish, it looks like plaster. Analyses supposedly say it's clay. It could be a clay. Either way, you don't see that, but it makes it look gray. And secondly, the face looks weird. And other people who have looked at photos of and taken a lot of time suggest that the faces have had sort of clay and plaster kind of made to make them look a little more like a typical gray alien. They do have elongated skulls, like many burials in southern Peru are known to do, many from this culture, the Nazca and the Paracas cultures. And they have 3 fingers and 3 toes that look really long. And if you follow a number of the links to Peruvian and other specialists that have looked at this, it is very obvious, and then there's x-rays that have appeared, that if you were to basically take off 2 fingers, and not just the fingers, but you get into the hand and take off a few more bones, that's exactly what they would look like. And they otherwise make no sense. So in other words, the remaining fingers are clearly human fingers. The remaining toes are clearly human toes, and they look long and weird because they've basically mutilated them and they've cut off the sides. And then it appears, skeptics are saying, they've coated these things in this plaster or clay or whatever. And there are 2 that are human, that are not melanges. There's the full-size Maria, and then another one appeared that was a small child, and there was a red mark on the forehead, and that is typical of pre-Hispanic Peruvian burial.
Okay, so I have to ask this question now because I'm concerned. They desecrated human remains?
That is the accusation.
Yep.
By pretty much every professional archaeologist, anthropologist that is not involved with the project that has looked at them. Which is why I think this this did not blow up the way certain other of these cases have, because a number of people that were initially supportive of this have walked away, I think because they are somewhat concerned about what the blowback might be, because that's kicking it up a notch. That's escalating quite quickly.
Yeah,
if you're going. And the other thing is, some of the supporters of this are touting the radiocarbon dates and like, these are clearly old. Yeah, they are, which then gets you into heritage law and criminal prosecution for looting of human remains that could be 1,400 years old. And again, I'm working off of what they've published. They've put out these things. Several of the people that were initially supportive when DNA came back and said this was human and male that's when they dropped off. And again, you can find all this in the Atlantic article, and if you just kick around and look around, we can provide some links. But this has not taken off. Now, part of it was I'm not going to name it, but there's a streaming service, kind of like a Netflixy sort of thing, that is focused on New Age, spiritual, paranormal, conspiratorial things, and has some original programming and some, like Netflix, some original programming and some not. That became a significant sponsor of this. And there's been a lot of infighting. And I don't want to get into it because it becomes sort of a popcorn show. It's like fascinating and all, but not that fascinating. This is in a larger context of there being a lot of interest in this group, and you can watch your Ancient Aliens. In fact, they did a whole show on that, which I don't want to get into, but there are some interesting things, including who was on that episode and what occurred, but involving skulls from that region and various claims that they are either genetically not human, or if they're genetically human, that they're genetically not South American and usually Middle Eastern or European, and you can start to read agendas into that. Right. But there is a longer history of this, and it's starting to remind me of, and we've talked about this before, there has been a lot of analysis, well, not a lot, but some analysis of how in the 1990s, there became sort of a group of names you would keep hearing again and again associated with the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Something similar seems to be happening in southern Peru, that there are these names that keep popping up, although a lot of them eventually got off of this project when it started to just not look good. And, you know, good for them. Yeah, there does this. That's basically where this case is. We may hear more from it, but it doesn't seem to have exploded in the way that I think some people initially thought it might. But yeah, no, as Ken I think was saying, no humans were harmed in the forming of Fiji Mermaids.
Yeah,
might have been.
Yes. Exactly.
And everybody involved were basically consenting buyers and sellers, and that is not quite the situation from what it looks like here. Now, again, people who are involved or partisans for this will say this, that, or the other, but this appears, almost every expert who's looked at this says, these appear to be ancient human remains that have been mutilated and modified to look inhuman and to support a agenda that is not in accordance with mainstream science, but is in accordance with alternative archaeological ideas.
Yeah. Whether you agree with Barnum or not, I think his argument that, hey, listen, folks, this is for entertainment purposes certainly seems a lot more reasonable than, I don't think, nothing about the story that Jeb just told is entertaining. The agenda here seems to be a whole lot darker than.
Well, I would say that for some people, they absolutely buy into it, and they think that, you know, so there's about three groups, and then well, Sarah, I heard you asking a question. I have a thing that, and as you know, I launch. So once I launch, it's hard to pull back, not to say anything about the news. But what were you going to ask?
I was going to ask, aren't at least some of the people involved with the Nazca mummies also the same people that were involved with the fairy skeleton or fairy mummy thing that was found a while back?
That's where it gets. This is why. This is one of the reasons I am being. You can again look at the Atlantic article.
Yeah, and we will totally link to that in the show notes. Yeah,
but one of the reasons I'm being slippery is not just because any number of reasons, but part of it, frankly, is it's hard to say exactly who is where. There are people who have made denunciations who initially were a little more sympathetic to this, and what involvement means. So, for example, I mentioned Jaime Maussan. He does not appear to have been initially involved. Like, I don't think he made them. I think somebody else made them, but he then got involved, and that angered other people. So there's been sort of this infighting. But at what point do we talk about what involvement means? But he was sort of circling that too, and other people. So that's what I'm getting at. Like, when I say there's this Giza Plateau style, a sort of mini college of these people, kind of cottage industry, in and out. Yeah, kind of, sort of. There's the Metapec creature, which was a monkey, if I remember correctly. There was another ufologist or UFO person that got involved with a Paracas mummy, which turned out to be a little like a neonate or a fetus or something. Those people are not necessarily tied in here, but the concept is similar, and some people are sort of in the same. It gets very murky. It gets very, very murky.
Maybe that's why this didn't blow up so much. I mean, aside from hopefully the human remains. Maybe it's because these people who are involved have been tied to so many other obvious frauds that they're just kind of running out of credibility at this point.
I do wonder. I mean, some of them, if you look them up, if the thing you're most famous for after 2015 is the Roswell slides. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a legitimate case. Some of them are not. Some of them are unknowns. But some of them, mainstream reporters, they're like, oh, who is no, we're not going to do this. I just read a thing. But what I was going to answer your question, Ken, with the I think for some people it is entertainment. For some people it's a diehard belief, and it may be a specific belief. For others, they may not have a specific belief in anything particularly involving Peruvian anything, but they're like, there's a global conspiracy, there's disclosure coming. The evil government entities and the evil breakaway civilization, they can only keep the truth gone for so long. An old-time 1990s punk rocker is going to release the news, or the Tom DeLonge thing. I don't know if you know what that is, from Blink 182, if I remember right.
Right, yeah.
Or this person's going to, or that person's going. And of course, these things seem to happen 6 months from now, and they've been happening since the beginning of UFOs. But so one, there's that. So like, even if they don't necessarily believe in a particular thing, it's one more thing that might break it all open. And if this one falls apart, there'll be another down the road.
Right.
And you could call that entertainment, but I think even some people, quite a few people, it becomes, well, wouldn't that be cool? And I kind of believe in something, and I don't believe in some things, and that'd be kind of cool. That does start to fall close to entertainment, because it's not involving a lot of investment, and it becomes sort of like a thing you consume. And I suspect some people looking at the Fiji Mermaid felt the same way.
Right. All right. Well, again, you mentioned the campfire ghost stories, where, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but it sure as hell is fun to think about.
And intriguing and interesting.
Yeah,
it makes you think.
I mean, how many times have we said something like, it's a good story, but,
Yeah.
Well, and
so
the parallel one is the Star Child as well.
Yeah, the Star Child. Now there's no evidence that was modified.
No, not at all.
But it was touted as evidence of an alien-human hybrid, or an alien or something like that, depending on which version of Lloyd Pye or other story. And that's not the only one. And again, there has been a lot of interest in the last few years with elongated skulls in Peru and elsewhere, but especially Peru. And there's a longer story again with sort of shady elements here. And some people trying to tie it into extraterrestrials. And a lot, though, and frankly, this seems to be increasing much bigger in many ways, although it doesn't travel as well in the mainstream, with the Nephilim, with giants. Because there is an ideology about the idea of giants returning as part of the end times battle in certain, not the most mainstream, but again, probably more common than you think, places on the religious spectrum.
I think we should maybe consider doing an episode on the whole practice of the elongated skulls and how that's being reinterpreted by the fringe. I think
it's a great idea. I do think if we did that, we should have somebody who would definitely, we would want to get a osteologist of some kind, biologist. And I can think of some actually, and so we'll talk about that. But yeah, it is something that has always been there. People have always found them interesting, and people have tried to make them into sort of non-human people.
Right. Yeah, it's a reoccurring theme with them.
But it has really picked up, one, in the era of clickbait, sort of social media ecosphere. But secondly, I think in no small part because of this. I don't know where the idea that Nephilim had cone heads came from, but that now has really caught on with quite a few people.
And it shows up in some sci-fi too, doesn't it? Where the aliens have these elongated. I mean, even in the original movie Aliens, and I guess the ones after that, they do have these elongated skulls. Well, and maybe there's that inspires that.
Well, I mean, because they look sort of, well, for aliens, yes. So aliens, it makes okay. You don't see me air quoting, but I'm air quoting that it makes sense. Because the idea of aliens that we generally have in a lot of Western and now with the expansion of that societies is that they should have big giant heads, but otherwise look like us, and have little spindly bodies and big heads. And there's a long history behind that we're not going to get into. And that doesn't make per se sense for the Nephilim from Scripture or even later folkloric tradition after Scripture. But and I guess this will be sort of my final note on this. Of course, Jason Colavito and others have pointed out repeatedly that there is a strong relationship, and the ancient aliens people do it too, between ideas of Nephilim, giants, and ancient aliens. And so it seems to have like we've talked about so much, cross-pollinated back to that. But that is something we clearly cannot get into today.
No.
And again, go look at the Atlantic article. We may link some other things. I talked about this in a little more detail on Sharon Hill's, I think, episode 22 of 15 Credibility Street.
And we'll link that in the
have
show
some other
notes, too.
things. Yeah, we'll link a number of things. But yeah, that's sort of the story there.
Ken, quick final thoughts?
I mean, this was great fun. I love talking about P.T. Barnum. We will also link you to the P.T. Barnum, the website of the museum. There's a virtual museum put up by those folks as well. So even, we'll keep plugging. Hopefully at some point, they'll be able to reopen that museum. But I have no idea what P.T. Barnum, how he would react to some of the stuff we've talked about in the last part of this podcast. But there's another interesting thing.
I suspect he would have done it better.
Well, yes. He
Considering what he could have used as materials for some of his hoaxes, the fact that he didn't use human remains, I think says a lot.
Well, we also just did recently the Ishimaya episode, so
this is
true. Yeah,
this is
so
true.
but
talking of chimeras, the museum, the Barnum Museum actually has a full-scale skeleton of a centaur, and it's really nicely done. It's a piece of art, obviously. Yeah. But it is gorgeous, and it's mounted behind a glass case, and it looks for all the world like a centaur person, a horse person. Very cool.
Which therefore makes them real.
Right.
Well, there it is. It's in a museum, for God's sake.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for coming on the show.
Great
I
show,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
And this has been a fun topic. So, all right.
All right. Talk to you all later.
Talk to you all later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
As one will call, no, we don't do dinosaurs.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archyfantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archyfantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archyfantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at archyfantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archyfantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.